Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Catechumens Depart. I'm Eric Anderson.
I'm Father Mark Kozak from the Assumption of the Holy Virgin Mary Church here in South Philadelphia.
Thanks, Father. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again. This week, I guess we'll kind of continue where we left off. We talked a lot last week, interspersed with the rest of our topics, about the idea of individualism. That came up quite a bit. And I've thought about that since last week, and I wanted to just sort of break off and focus on that. Because we've talked a lot over the past few discussions, or just over our discussions in general, about the American ideal versus the Christian ideal, and different sort of forms of religiosity and things in our culture. And our culture is built on the idea of individualism, on the idea of, well, largely the individual consumer. And that's not the Christian understanding of the individual. But I know you've thought a lot about this, so why don't you riff on that for us for a minute? Because I have my ideas about what Christianity tells us about being an icon of the divine and what that means for being an individual, over and against what America tells us about being an individual. But can you sort of compare, contrast for us?
First of all, I think the best place to start is in defining terms. Because when we say individual, even in a Christian context, there's a lot of baggage, a lot of verbiage that goes along with that. Well, the best English word to use is person, rather than individual. So the person is the one that's made in the image and likeness of God, not only the individual, because the individual is a shadow of the person. So the individual is the one that's been deified in our culture.
Okay.
So and consumerism is a great place to start. When I was growing up, 50 years ago, my parents had me open up a savings account at a local bank. And that's how I bought my first television set, which was a 12-inch Sony black and white television set, which my parents proceeded to put on the kitchen table. I was not allowed to watch that in my room.
Hey, you had some smart parents.
But I bought it out of my money that I saved. Nowadays, we give young people credit cards. Credit is, we have to have good credit. That's the most important thing. It doesn't matter how much money we've saved. It doesn't matter sometimes it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter as much of what we own like it was in the past. So we've had this consumer society, this consumer culture thrust upon us. And I don't really think that way.
Yeah.
And I have to ask myself why I don't think that way. And the first reason is because I wasn't raised that way. But the second reason is that
Annie,
get down, sweetie. It's okay. It's all right. It's all right.
She really wants to be a lapdog, Father.
The second reason is that the individual has become deified.
And not in the correct way.
And not deified with a very small d, a very small I, a very small b, and so on. So a great way of looking at this is you get out on one of our interstates and you're driving your car, and we have lanes and we have laws and we have turn signals and everything else. But many of us, over half of the people that are driving, I maintain, think that they're the only person on the road. So this is how they drive. So they don't look at a mirror. They don't use turn signals. Those are optional. It's optional to do it's my road. or they're looking at everything else but the road.
Often at their phone.
Often at their phone, or they're looking at something else and everything else, rather than when I was growing up, I learned how to drive on the brand new Washington Beltway when there wasn't a lot of cars on it. I know that many of you who have driven through Washington cannot believe that, but that was true in 1973 when I started driving. There wasn't a lot of cars.
I've heard that about Los Angeles too, and it's like unthinkable.
Yeah, it's unthinkable to think that the Washington Beltway didn't have a lot of cars on it. But I lived next to the Beltway for my entire life. Up until I was 22 years old. So I knew the Beltway very well.
Yeah.
But one of the things that our driving instructor put into our heads is that you have to be watching everywhere. You have to look everywhere, and you have to have an escape route every time you go out on the Beltway. You need to escape somewhere. If you're in some situation, you have to have at least one way of getting out of it. Now, those are things that are beyond the individual.
Yeah.
Those are things that a whole person would do. Paying attention to what's going on around you. The job to drive is to, there might be all kinds of slogans and everything, and you might be able to get into your $80,000 car and drive down the road, or what's his name, the actor that fishes from the back seat of his one SUV and everything else. That may be true for some people. That's certainly not true for most of us. What's true is that in driving, our job is to go from point A to point B. That's all right. That's a military way of looking at it. Sorry, too bad, so sad. That's why I drive. I mean, I don't drive for the
You're not a pleasure driver.
Well, I have been. I mean, I've driven across country 7 times.
You've got me beat by 4.
I've lived in 12 different states. But I still, when I get in my car, I'm going from point A to point B. If I pleasure drive, it's like in March when the pandemic started. I went down to the river, which is 0.75 miles away from my house, just to get in the car and look at the river for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, and then go back home. But what I'm saying here is that since the individual is deified now, the individual rules.
I'm not sure I follow quite. I want you to help us out here a little bit. Can you break apart a little bit further what you mean to distinguish between individual and person? Like, can you define those a little bit more clearly? I'm hearing you say, like,
okay,
the person is the whole being.
The person is the whole being. The person can have relationship with others.
Okay.
The person can have a full relationship with God, or moving towards that in theosis.
Okay.
A person can get married to another person and have a meaningful relationship with each other while still remaining a person. Rather than having 2 individuals get married and they're both individuals, and there might be problems with that.
So do you feel like then maybe I'm hearing like the individual is almost like a person's construct of they sort of like it's more of a constructed self versus like a total self in a way?
It's society's construct of what we're supposed to be, which is
a collection of rights and demands. Well, it seems like a lot of times.
But more demands than rights now. More demands and rights, certainly, than the person would have the responsibility.
Yeah, a person would have duty to another person because they are reflecting the image of God in one another.
Right, and the person has absolutes. The person understands what morality is and where it comes from. The person has relationship with other people. Even monks and nuns have relationships with other people, if they're even hermits do, because they do come back out from being hermits and come back into the community. We can look back in the history of the church and monks and nuns who came back who lived in a hermit type life alone. And then they came back and they were great confessors to people. They were not power personalities necessarily directly in their communities, but they were, it's a different. They weren't just an individual or just a holy man or a holy woman.
Yeah.
They were persons that had experienced God in this unique way through prayer and fasting alone in a desert situation. So we do that too. We have our desert situations sometimes in the cities, and we've been talking about that, privately, sometimes in the suburbs, sometimes in I know people that live in who live in very isolated places. I lived in Alaska for 3 years. It was very much like what I had read about Russia, where there are very few, places to go to, and and things to do, and after you've gone through, do you hunt or do you fish? I mean, what do you do? Well, you go to church and you're involved with that, and you're involved with your community, and you learn about the history of the place where you're at. And you can live 60 miles from the nearest road, or you can live, you can get in your car and drive a whole 52 miles, and that's it. You can't drive any further. You can learn how to travel by boat and by airplane and so on. But the whole person does that. Some people will say, well, Alaska is for the individual, for the person to go up and brave nature. Well, actually, it is very hard for the individual to go up and brave nature. There's actually a PBS TV show about that, about a guy that did that and lived alone in Alaska. But that's very super rare, and it's even rarer now in the 21st century. Because of how our society is constructed. So when we get to the person, then we can look at the whole human being. It's not an accident that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are 3 different persons, not 3 different individuals.
Oh, wow, okay.
Okay. So we have a society of individuals. So the individual would say, well, this is what I believe, and I'm not particularly interested in what you believe. This is what I do. It's about me, because I'm the center of the universe. And, the astronomers have, you do understand that
That's
the universe doesn't revolve around you. So sorry about that.
You've just completely broken the idea.
I know,
of Twitter. Twitter is over. Father Mark read Twitter.
I've broken Twitter. I've broken all kinds of things.
It's like Facebook. Facebook. Social media is over. It doesn't revolve around you.
But can the person? Are the person and the individual connected to each other? Well, yeah, in a sense they are. A person is, like I said, it's the whole person that we look at when we look at another human being. We don't only look at a particular person as, white male, Protestant, Anglo-Saxon, and I don't even know if you could do that in many places anymore, because of the kind of society that we have. Can we look at a individual only through one lens, or should we have what religious faith do they have? So and so is a Orthodox. Well, in our case, we could say so and so is an Orthodox Christian and has this particular view. We can say that, but many people in America can't say that. So and so is a Protestant, so this is what they're like. So and so is a Roman Catholic, so this is what they believe. That's not necessarily true, because the individual, it's about what I believe, what my faith is, rather than about what the faith of the church is.
Yeah. Which I think, going back to all of our discussions on the Enlightenment and Protestantism and the Reformation and such, like, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's a sort of natural evolution of a lot of that thinking.
Yeah, it's the next step you take from Enlightenment, from Reformation. Oh, well, we don't need it. We don't need these particular sacraments. The church doesn't need to work in this particular way. Doesn't need to sell this. So we don't need anything else either. So we're going to throw this and this and this and this and this and this away. Well, that's the first question is, who are you? You know, like what gives you the responsibility to do this? And the second thing is, have you gone through what you've thrown away? You know, and the answer to those questions was, you know, they didn't really know who they were, and they didn't know what they were throwing away.
Yeah. And
so
go ahead.
You talk to a Protestant 500 years later and go through this history, and you talk to him about how Luther himself was interested in the Orthodox Church. Melanchthon, you know, wrote the Patriarch of Constantinople. We talk about Luther was interested in confession and believed that the body and blood of Christ, the communion was the body and blood of Christ.
Yeah.
Shock of shocks. You know, so what happened here? Well, the door was open, and the foundation was wobbly. You know, and then came the Enlightenment itself, and then came the Industrial Revolution itself, where we can worship what we make. You know, and we can devote our times to that, and then we can worship when we need to rest, because we worship work, many of us.
Yeah.
Because that's a great thing to do, isn't it? To work hard, you know, support our families, support our churches, support other good things, and to work hard and retire well, and get deserved rest. And there's nothing wrong with those things, but now we're in a post-religious, post-Christian society.
Right, like we were talking about last time. Yeah, like
we're in the middle of a medical pandemic. We're in the middle of we still don't know the extent of the economic problems that we're in.
Yeah.
We still don't understand that.
Right.
So those answers are, we don't know. The individual isn't good at we don't know.
No, not at all.
The individual wants answers to this and that related to the individual. The person wants answers related to not only themselves, but to others. So it's God, family, friends, neighbors. You know, the whole person will work on those things. So people ask me, well, what do I do now during the pandemic? Well, you pray, you go to church, you give to charity, you do the same things that we always do. There are some restrictions that we can do, you know, that we have, but basically we do what we normally do as Orthodox Christians. We don't do something different because it's a pandemic. We've been through these before.
And like brutal ones.
And ones
like Spanish flu or the bubonic plague or
Spanish flu, bubonic plague. How about the Russian Revolution and the purges under Stalin?
Yeah.
How about the Ottoman Empire, 500 years worth of persecution by the state versus over the Orthodox Church?
Yeah.
You know, and so on. You know, countless. There are countless, and then, you know, pre-Constantine times in the Roman Empire.
Oh yeah.
So people are worried about the church and everything, and I'm going like, well, if we do our jobs as those who are made in the image and likeness of God, if we're good people, the church is going to be there. Is it going to be a church that has, our current guesstimate in the Orthodox Church is 250 million, whatever guess is.
Baptized individuals, yeah.
Is it going to be 250 million? I don't know. And that's not overly important.
Yeah.
What's important is that there are believers that meet, and they partake of the body and blood of Christ. They participate in the mysteries of the church, and they spread the gospel message. That's what it's about. So that gets back to what we've been talking about the last 3 times is what are we doing here?
Yeah, like what are we up to?
Well, this is what we're up to.
Yeah.
And we can't get away, we can't like run away from the foundation. Not because the foundation isn't solid, but because we need the foundation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need those bricks of holy tradition, iconography, holy liturgy, the mysteries of the church, the lives of the saints, and all those bricks that make the foundation of Christianity.
And you have to have those because you can see throughout the modernist project and over and over and over, if you try to take them away, we just reinvent them. And we reinvent them in bad, destructive ways. It's
they can be warped into just horrible things.
The tradition becomes the tradition of your party, and the saints become, whoever just died on the Supreme Court or whatever. It's like I walked the dog today, and there's icons of the recently deceased justice already up, and it's like, so that's visual evidence to me of a warped kind of tradition. And that's not to give my opinion one way or another on the deceased justice. It's just that it's like that's clearly taking the place of
in our culture. It takes the place of saints,
which we've talked about a little bit before. Yeah,
we've done this from the very beginning.
Yeah.
From the first and second Great Awakenings in the 18th century, 19th century, we made many gods out of the preachers that came out and set up tents and brought people back to Jesus and everything else. And we did that with our politicians. We put our politicians on our money all over the place, and we spray their names on signs all over the place, and they become, our heroes, our saints, our anti-saints.
Yeah, it's like a real crummy pantheon.
So it's they become the most important thing that's going on, and they're not.
Yeah.
Are they important in our culture? Yes.
Yeah.
But remember, this is a democratic federal republic where these people are supposed to work for us, not the other way around. So, it's like, and it took a lot for me to make that statement because I spent 22 years as a naval officer where I couldn't make a semi-political statement. That was a semi-political statement.
Yeah.
So I can get by with that.
You can. So
people will ask me indirectly, they already have, who are you going to vote for? Who are you going to vote for? I said, in 2016, I said one word the Sunday before the election, and that word is a 4-letter word.
Help?
Vote. The word is vote.
Yeah. Because we still have that opportunity at the moment.
We have that opportunity and that responsibility. It's not a right, it's a responsibility.
And let's talk about that differentiation a little bit in regards to the difference between the whole Christian person, which is upon which the entire construction of Christendom, which, spoiler alert if you haven't been paying attention, we live at, maybe the end of Christendom, but all of our values and everything all rests on the back of the whole Christian person operating responsibly in a community of other such persons. Versus, I will use another image of another icon, if you will, because I walk around here a lot with the dog. The icon of the fractious and I would say broken society that we currently experience is a person shuffling down the street like this with a mask over their face, covering their face, staring into their phone with their earphones on, entirely wrapped up in the individual.
Well, yeah, and to the point of I've seen them cross the street against the light and then scream and yell at the car that almost hit them because they weren't paying attention to anything around them. That is a wonderful symbol of the individual in our culture. Or another one of my favorite ones is the person on the bicycle, riding on the bicycle, talking on the phone, or texting.
Texting, I know. I used to be really proud that I could ride no hands on a bicycle when I was a kid.
Yeah, I was too.
But we didn't have these. I was just like, woo, check it out.
Yeah, it was like...
Which always freaks mom out, right? But
the individual looks at the rights. What rights do I have?
It's my right to cross the street when I'm looking at my phone.
It's my right to cross the street. It's, it's my space. It's my body.
Yeah, it's my right to do with my body as I want, whatever.
They're my rights.
It's my right to sleep with whoever I want to, whenever I want to, whatever. It's my right.
All these things are my rights.
Yeah.
They're my rights in this country. It's my rights for freedom and liberty and justice. Well, I'm not, forget about the justice part.
Drop that, would
freedom and liberty.
Yeah. Happiness.
It's
the
my
pursuit of happiness.
To have happiness. Whatever that means. I had no idea what that word means.
Yeah, if I were quibbling with the founding fathers on their choice of language, I would not choose that word.
That is not a good word.
No, to me, that's an ephemeral side product. But anyhow.
So the person, the Christian person, looks at the responsibility. This doesn't belong to me.
Your bicep?
My bicep doesn't belong to me. I'm not going to do this because always people are thinking like I'm pointing at my glasses. These don't belong. Well, actually, these do belong to me.
Yes,
but this does not. This belongs to God. I am the steward of this. We're the greenest of any Christian group that you could even imagine. They even call the ecumenical patriarch.
I know.
Constantinople, the green patriarch.
I know.
Do you know why? It's because theologically we're the greenest group.
Yeah.
Because we understand what stewardship
is. Yep. Yeah.
So everything around us, without God, wouldn't exist.
It is not being. Yeah.
So that's the first thing that we got to get through our heads.
Yeah.
The person belongs to God.
And by extension, other people.
Right, and by extension, other people, and takes care of other people, and takes care of the things around them. One of my professors used to say about saints is that the guy that picks up our garbage could easily be a better Christian than any one of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he picks up the garbage for 30 years and does a wonderful job and cares for the people that he's serving, understands what service to others really means, and he's a living saint. Whereas the theologian or the historian or the professional clergyman, we're still struggling, down at the bottom somewhere.
That's a real inversion of our. Well, I think of that a lot, right? Yeah. Because there's no room for self-sacrifice. It doesn't even make any sense within the idea of an individual with rights. That doesn't allow for or have any place for self-sacrifice. Because why would you? My rights delineate this amount of space and this amount of things that I can do, and don't you step on it. And there's not even any space in that, which is why I think a lot of things are breaking down around
it
us.
is.
It's like
It is, because it's also this.
because you just end up with little wars every time these bounce off each other.
Well, that's sort of what happens to people, is they do have these little wars.
Yeah.
And I've often described it in confession with people, is that just think about it. We have 7.5 billion people in the world, and it's like we're having all these free will wars go on like this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of talking to each other and learning about each other and listening to each other and loving each other as God loves us,
Mm-hmm.
then there wouldn't be any all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So if we look at responsibility not first, but only look at responsibility vis-a-vis the person,
Mm-hmm.
then the individual fades away.
Yeah.
So,
Which is like totally fine in my little idea right now.
Which is good, because then all the baggage of the individual fades away.
Yeah.
Because the individual is not capable of the responsibility of understanding that.
Yeah.
And if they are, it's in a shadow-like way.
Yeah, it's usually it's a politically loaded term I'll use, but it becomes virtue signaling, right? It's not virtue. It is
Right.
It is co-opting the idea of virtue and saying it but not doing anything.
Or even doing something, or saying, "Gee, I want to put a spin on this particular subject, so I'm going to say X, Y, Z. I'm going to go do X, Y, Z, and look how great I am.
Look at me, Lord, how much I've put into the coffer."
That's what the individual does.
Yeah, but that's what the parable is about in the Bible.
That's what the parable is.
Rich man you're the clergy. What's the parable again?
Well, the rich man and Lazarus.
No, the other one where it's the publican and the Pharisee.
The publican and the Pharisee.
Yeah,
that's about prayer, which is like the ultimate piece of something to talk about.
Yeah.
Look at the Pharisee is, look at me, I do all my prayers. Isn't it great? Look how great I am. I take out my prayer book every day. I pray all the time. Isn't it great? And look at that guy up there. Look how terrible he is. And that guy up there says, "Oh Lord, my God, have mercy upon me, a sinner."
Which is like the prototype of our fundamental prayer.
It's the prototype of the Jesus prayer. Mm-hmm. And he understands his life as a person better than the Pharisee does as an individual. Because the Pharisee picked up all of the doodads of religion, being a Pharisee, but he applied almost none of them. And who is the person that Jesus looks at in that particular parable? Well, obviously, the publican.
The publican, yeah.
The one who understands what compassion is, who understands what humility is, who understands what it means to be a steward. All these things that we've been talking about, which we have to do all the time. We can't just do them when we want to do them. We can't do them when we want. We can't do them because it's a cause. All right? So Christianity is now my cause. No.
Or the vestiges of Christian values without the God.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and this is where some people in the political world will make a mistake and use that and say, well, I'm a good this and I'm a good that. So, well, they made sort of two mistakes there. One mistake is that I doubt if in your religion they really want you to say you're a political person, said you're a good XYZ. Mm-hmm. And two, politically, you just did something against the Constitution of the United States. Because I could really care less what faith that you belong to. Yeah, I'm going to make a decision on your particular views on policy and so forth. Mm-hmm. We have that freedom in our culture to worship the way that we want to worship. Not worship the way that someone else wants us to worship. Mm-hmm. So that means that someone else is right or someone else is wrong or someone else is this. We all have the right to worship the way that we want to worship. And that's what's defended in freedom of religion in our country. Now, that can be very hard because some people think in the back of their minds, well, this was a Christian country and blah, 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 blah. Or, we had Christian values and blah, 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 blah. And wasn't so-and-so a great Christian, da, 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 da. And we've talked about this. Our culture was set up in a short 100 years time, a little bit more than that, with having our own feast days, our own saints, our own times to celebrate our country in a particular religious-like way, and so on. And like you said, with icons, icon-like things coming up about people that die, and deifying political and societal people, to the extent of they join a pantheon, they join as you said that yourself. Yeah, they join a group of saint-like people. Well, that's not freedom of religion. Right. That's civil religion. Right. Which we've talked about. Yeah. And that's a whole different story. If you wanted to have another thought, go ahead. That's okay. I was I'm good. No. I guess I forgot to set a timer, so we'll do like one more chunk and then probably wrap up for today. So if we've gone over 30 minutes, you can go to sleep now. Just kidding. Just kidding. Wake up. Wake up. Oh, we just dropped from like 7 listeners to 3. Oh, well, okay. Hey, it happens. Hi, Jerome. Are you still with us? My final question for today then would be because this is something that because we are so deeply acculturated in this way of thinking, we are so deeply steeped in the idea of these are my rights, don't tread on me, get off my lawn, get off my toes, whatever. I'm walking here. I'm constantly looking for ways to help myself in my spiritual life turn toward responsibility for others, towards being a person instead of an individual. What are some sort of practical ways that we can begin to implement to do that selfishly, and then hopefully that's helpful to our watchers? Well, personhood is the spiritual life. Okay. So that's, we're given the image and we approach the likeness. Okay. That's the definition there. So that's an relatively easy thing to say. It's the hardest thing that we do in our lives. Yeah. So we have to be open to what's really going on. We had a little discussion at our eating phenomenon about the difference between real things and reality things. Yeah. And we have to be real. Okay. We have to be real people, not the assumed what reality is. The construction of reality. A construction of reality or destruction of reality. Yeah. So we have to do the very best that we can where we're living. We have to do the very best that we can where we're working. We have to, it goes back to the garbage man and what he did. Some humility and well, we have to function in our work and in our schools and in what we're doing with humility. I mean, without humility, we won't grow as people. Which is completely antithetical to our entire society. It's against what our society looks at, yeah. And I've lived in New York and Los Angeles and all of these places, and it's just and we have to recognize the talents that God has given us. This is something that we need to be doing from the age of about 12 until we're about 90 or 100. So guess what?
Oh, I can't tap out yet?
You can't like tap out. No.
Oh.
So, I worked for the church for so many years, and so I'm going to take a little rest. You might take a little rest, but that doesn't mean that you might not be called to do something else in the church.
You're like, I'm glad you retired from chaplaincy. Here's a church.
Yeah. In my case, I was part of making the decision in coming to my parish, but I had retired as a chaplain, as a Navy officer, and I could have made other choices, but I made a choice to come back and be a parish priest after 8 years of being a supply priest.
Well, we're very glad and lucky that you did.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say here is that if we spiritually open the door to God, then we're going to open the door to being a person.
Okay.
If we spiritually open the door to other people, we're going to be a person.
How do we do that with other people, right?
Well, we have to understand where they're coming from, and we have to understand sometimes the limits that we might have in dealing with the other. And it's not like saying you're going to fall in like with every person that you meet. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But we need to love them as a brother and sister in Christ. We need to love them as someone made in the image and likeness of God. And we might actually learn how to like somebody over the years. We have to give them a chance. And sometimes this happens within our own families. We have families that don't talk to each other for years and years and years. My family, I came from one of those myself.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm the last person in my family, in my line. So it's like...
I have a similar family, yeah.
It's like I have lots of people to talk to. I had nobody to talk to. But the point is that I opened the door and I have some first cousins once removed. Maybe it's time to open the door to them. And to have a relationship with them. This is what the person does. The individual is not going to think of these things because it doesn't have to do with me.
Yeah.
It has to do with the other.
Right. To use your family example, it's like I'm cutting you out because we have this amount of hurt between us. You stepped on my toes, and we disagreed.
Or we just didn't. We just sort of lost each other. And that's what happens with a lot of families. And if we look at what our Lord Jesus Christ did in the Gospels, he opened the door for the Samaritan woman. He opened the door for the people that came to him who were suffering and who were ill and healed them. He opened the door to the centurion's slave and the centurion to understand, and his disciples to understand what his role was. He didn't shut the door and say, "Oh, well, you're not real people." Right. You're not Jewish. You're not whatever. We're all real people.
Yeah.
Okay. We are all people. All of us.
Yeah.
Even the ones that have the most, craziest things going on in their lives, they're still real, whole, not whole necessarily. They're working on the whole part. I am certainly.
Yeah.
But they're people.
Okay.
They're not just an individual. So you can't use that phrase in Christianity and say, "Oh, so-and-so's just an individual." Or that person is just an individual here at church or this place or that place. Well, no, because that's the definition that we're automatically going to use is the definition that our culture has given us, which is the individual is me, and the individual is limited.
It's contra the body of Christ,
and which becomes the this spiritual disease. Limiting, trying to limit the person into just being an individual. So,
cool. Well, great. Seems like a good place to tie up.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great conversation. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you as always, Father Mark. It's always a pleasure.
Good to be here.
And we will see you next time. I don't have my lovely producer wife here, so I've got to come up real close to the camera.
He's got to do this right.
I've got to do it right now. Let me see if the subdeacon is watching. He's real picky on this.
That's right. Here we go.
All right, guys. Until next week, catechumens depart.